Starting off this countdown, we have the plot to kill. This photo was taken of Thomas Bart Whittaker on the left and his younger brother Kevin on the right, just hours before Thomas planned to have his family killed. So apparently the two brothers were just goofing off and their mother wanted to take a photo of them. Then later they went out for dinner as like a little celebration for Thomas completing his exams, which was a lie. Anyways, while they were at the restaurant, Thomas had his friend enter his home and retrieve a gun and stage a burglary. He then waited at the front door for Thomas's family to return home. Once they did, he shot Thomas's mom and brother. His dad managed to survive. The photo shows Thomas's happy younger brother, but little did he know that his older brother literally had a plot to kill him. It's so disturbing.
In our number 9 spot today, we have the core. This photo shows a physicist named Harold Agnew, and while this looks like a relatively normal, non-threatening photo, what he has in his hand is truly devastating. Harold is holding the nuclear core of what was nicknamed the Fat Man atomic bomb. This means that Harold is holding the nuclear core of the atomic bomb that was later dropped on Nagasaki in 1945. The immediate blast, of course, took many lives, but so did the long-term effects of the bomb, like radiation illnesses and that sort of thing. It's crazy to look at a photo like this because it seems so perfectly normal when he literally has a life-changing, world-ending device in the palm of his hand. Also, I don't think I could ever hold something like that. Not only would I just not want to, but I don't think I could even get near it for fear of something going wrong. In our number 8 spot today, we have the eruption. This is a photo that is showing Mount Pinatubo, which is located in the Philippines on June 15th, 1991. That is the day that this volcano erupted into what would be the second largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. Certainly impressive, also extremely terrifying. This photo shows the pyroclastic flow full of hot gas and rock being flung into the air. Eruptive activity in the volcano first started on April 2nd of that year, which prompted researchers to set up seismographs in the area. By June, the volcano was having a group of progressively shallower eruptions before, on June 12th, the volcano had its first spectacular eruption, which sent an ash column 19 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Additional smaller explosions continued on June 13th, which then led to some intense seismic activity. After more highly gas-charged magma reached the surface, on June 15th, the volcano once again exploded, this time sending the cloud of ash 40 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Volcanic ash and pumice blanketed the surrounding areas, and pyroclastic flows filled what were once deep valleys with fresh volcanic deposits. It is truly magnificent and extremely powerful, and this photo shows just that. In our number 7 spot today, we have post-war. This is a photo that is said to have been taken in 1946, just after the end of the Second World War. Story goes that the person in this photo is a soldier who had just returned home from war, which would already be difficult and challenging enough, but as he returned home, he came to hear the news that unfortunately, despite his survival, his family had lost their lives during the war. There is no doubt about the impact that either world war had on the world, and how the impact doesn't stop once the war is over. These wars changed the course of history, and they changed people's lives forever. This is definitely a difficult photo to look at, and it's an eerie reminder of those dark times. In our number 6 spot today, we have the disguise. Speaking of the Second World War, as it began to come to a close, many of the Germans who were involved in all of the many violations of human rights began to flee or try and hide or disguise themselves for fear of being persecuted. One of those was, of course, the worst of them all, Hitler himself. This photo, or rather series of photos, was created by the US government as an attempt to document the many ways that he could have disguised himself in order to escape being recognized and captured. At the time, the fear of him being able to escape responsibility and go on living his life abroad was very real. I mean, there have been others who actually did manage to do just that, and that is exactly the reason for these photos. There's also something kind of interesting and bizarre about what happens when we take away the features of his that we know him by. In the end, he didn't escape and go on to live abroad, but he did escape being held responsible before the world.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the submarine murder. Back in August of 2013, freelance journalist Kim Wall got an interview with Danish inventor Peter Madsen. As part of the interview, Kim was set to take a trip on his homemade submarine. This photo shows Kim aboard the submarine just before her trip. Sadly, once inside, Peter killed her and dismembered her body. Why did he do this? Well, some say say he became fascinated with murder and torture. Evidence showed that he had been watching videos of women being killed on his computer, and shortly before he beheaded Kim, he watched a video on it. So it was clear that he had a fascination with it. It's sad that Kim had to be his victim.
In our number 4 spot today, we have the lipstick killer. This is a photo that comes to us from December 10th, 1945. If looking at this image gives you a shudder down your spine, that absolutely makes sense, as it was written by a terrible person known as the lipstick killer. This photo is an image of a note he left written on the wall at one of his crime scenes. The photo comes from the apartment of Frances Brown, as just before he wrote this message, he took her life. After this message was left, he ended up taking the life of one other person because he was finally caught by the police 6 months later. The message scrawled in the photo reads, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." It is an absolutely chilling note with a horrific backstory. In our number 3 spot today, we have bad politics. This is a photo that shows the former First Lady Rosalynn Carter, and you may or may not be wondering who that man next to her is. And to that I say, my friends, that is the horrible, horrible monster that is John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown. This photo was taken at a Polish Constitution Day celebration in Chicago in 1978, which is the same year that Gacy was arrested for his crimes, so at the point this photo was taken, he had already taken the lives of at least 20 people. The reason he was there and was able to meet the First Lady is because he was not only the worst of the worst, he also somehow became the Democratic precinct captain in the Chicago suburbs in the 1970s, and he was the marshal of the Polish parade. The picture is even signed, quote, "To John Gacy, best wishes, Rosalynn Carter." It's terrible. I hate it so much. I feel very bad for anyone who had to meet him. In our number 2 spot today, we have the first day. This is a photo that shows Dorothy Count Scoggins as she joined her new school. What should be a perfectly normal activity was certainly anything but for Dorothy, as she was the first black person to attend Harding High School in Charlotte, North Carolina, which was previously an all-white school. After the passing of the Purcell Plan in 1956, there were 40 students who applied for transfers, and Dorothy was one of 4 who was accepted. This photo clearly shows that although small steps were being taken within the law to prevent segregation, there were no steps being taken within the students. As Dorothy just tries to get an education, you can see her peers clearly trying to disturb her peace. After 4 days of this kind of treatment, Dorothy's parents ended up withdrawing her from the school over fears for her safety. These images, however, were seen around the world. This photo acts as quite the reminder for where we were really not all that long ago. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Challenger crew. This is a photo that was taken of the clearly very excited Challenger crew as they walked down the ramp ready to head off on their mission. The crew even included 37-year-old Krista McAuliffe, who was a high school social studies teacher. She had won a spot on this mission through a program with NASA called the Teacher in Space program, and she had trained diligently for months in order to be the first non-military person in space. On January 28, 1986, the Challenger mission proved to be fateful just 73 seconds after liftoff. 2 rubber O-rings failed because of the cold temperatures of the morning, and on live television the world watched as the spacecraft broke apart and plunged into the ocean, sadly taking the lives of everyone on board. It is an absolutely tragic event made even more chilling by this final photo. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the fire. This is a photo that comes to us from 2003 at the Station nightclub in Rhode Island, and it shows the band Great White as they perform. While this seems like just a regular photo that someone took on their Motorola Razr, what ensued shortly after this photo was taken is absolutely tragic. Basically, as the band performed, there were some pyrotechnics that were set off, and while this was meant to be a spectacular display, it only ended up in disaster. The fireworks ended up setting all of the flammable acoustic foam in the walls and ceiling on fire, and within 1 minute, everything that was combustible was up in flames. Within 2 minutes, the entire club was fully engulfed in black smoke, and people were having trouble finding exits. In the end, this fire took the lives of 100 people, and another 230 were injured as a result. It has gone down in US history as one of the worst and most deadly nightclub fires. In our number 9 spot today, we have ancient preparations. This is a photo that isn't necessarily very old, but it's of some stuff that has been around for a lot longer than cameras have. These images were taken in the ancient city of Herxheim, which is located in Germany and dates back to about 7,000 years ago. The photo shows some artifacts which at a first glance don't look too dark or creepy or weird, but just wait. Apparently these artifacts and remains show clear signs of flesh stripping. Yeah, okay, wasn't expecting that one. Apparently this was a process that was part of the preparation before consuming human flesh. So yeah, maybe it is a pretty dark photo after all. I'm not exactly sure how all of these things were used or what exactly the process looks like, but I think that maybe that information might just be better left in the past. In our number 8 spot today we have the lone scientist. This is a photo that comes to us from shortly after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. Many of us of course already know plenty about it, but if unfamiliar, in April of 1986 there was an explosion and fire from a nuclear reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. This explosion happened when there was an issue as they were trying to begin an experiment which was set out to actually make the reactor more safe. Unfortunately, the way this reactor was designed placed too much responsibility in the hands of the operator. One thing led to another and it was a huge disaster and went on to become one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. The amount of radiation in the air caused alarms at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden, which was over 1,000 kilometers away, so it certainly wasn't anything to take lightly. That is exactly why this photo of a lone scientist going down into the dark radioactive filled area near the meltdown is so terrifying to look at. It reminds us of the bravery of those who went to help after the disaster, and it also reminds us just how scary some of the things we have on this planet really are. In our number 7 spot today we have the figures of the fire. This photo is both extremely unsettling and super captivating as it shows a scene after the Great Fire at Madame Tussauds in 1925. Of course, this wax museum is famous for the extremely lifelike wax figures that are created and find their home there, so you can only imagine the aftermath of a fire. These lifelike figures, but with missing heads and appendages, burnt skin and hair, and just clothing in disarray. Seeing this photo for the first time without knowing the story about it was definitely a bit of a confusing and terrifying experience. The heads on the ground really freaked me out for a full 5 seconds. As scary as it is, I'm just glad to hear that it's not real and just some creative casualties rather than what this photo appears to be at first. In our number 6 spot today we have All Hallows Eve. In this day and age when Halloween time comes around, we see all types of costumes. We see a few spooky scary ones, but for the most part we see princesses or fairies or basketball players or some sort of pop culture reference, but back in the day Halloween was a terrifying time. I'm not saying that because people dressed as all these elaborate scary creatures, I just mean that the absolute scraps people would throw together to make a Halloween mask are truly scarier than any creature I could come up with. This photo just shows a nice little family as they're ready to celebrate the spookiest day of the year, and oh my gosh, it is actually terrifying. Like, I feel like I'm looking at a still from the movie Strangers or something. It looks so terrifying, but it's likely just a completely harmless and innocent celebration. Honestly, well, I'm kind of over seeing people show up to Halloween parties as cats. I'll take that over a potato sack any day, apparently. In our number 5 spot today we have the Titanic. We all know the story of the Titanic. I mean, it's one of the most famous in history, and this photo comes from just before the historic iceberg encounter. On April 10th, 1912, the Titanic set sail on its maiden voyage, heading from Southampton over to New York City. The ship took a couple of stops along the way, one in France, one in Ireland, before setting off for the United States officially, and somewhere along the beginning part of its journey, someone was able to snap a photo of the ship as it sailed. It's not clear exactly where this photo was taken, but it is thought to be the last photo taken of the ship before its tragic end. Considering it was only 4 days after the ship set sail that it hit the iceberg, it is likely that this photo came not too long before the terrible day. In our number 4 spot today we have the Spectre. This is a photo that was taken in England in 1963, and it became known as the Spectre of the Newby Church. That of course is because of the ghostly figure that can be seen in this photo. I'm always a little suspicious of ghost photos. Some are certainly more convincing than others, but Photoshop in 1963 wasn't exactly as accessible and easy as it is now. The photo is said to have been taken by Reverend K.F. Lord inside of the Newby Church, which is located in North Yorkshire, England. Of course, I mean, like many of us are going to do, people were really skeptical of this apparition and just believed that it was a well done case of double exposure, which to be fair is entirely possible. The Reverend continued to swear up and down, however, that the photo was not doctored, so at this point there's no proof to prove either side, and it's just a game of he said she said. So what do you guys think? Apparition caught slippin', or is the Reverend making it up? In our number 3 spot today we have the eruption of Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens is a stratovolcano located in Skamania County, Washington. The volcano is best known for its huge and disastrous eruption on May 18th, 1980. This photograph comes from the photographer Robert Landsberg, who of course was in the area at the time of the eruption. Before the eruption, he had visited the area in order to photograph and document all of the changes that were happening. On May 18th, he was within a few miles of the volcano when it erupted. Since he unfortunately was so close to the explosion, he knew he would be unable to escape this disaster, so instead of focusing on the impossible, he focused on taking as many pictures as possible. Robert was obviously incredibly brave and dedicated, but he was also very smart. After snapping as many photos as he could, including this one, he then secured his camera in his backpack and covered his backpack with his body. He knew he was unlikely to survive, but he wanted to make sure that these photos did. His body was found 17 days later with his backpack still underneath him. His film was of course developed and has provided geologists with some really valuable insights with his close documentation of the eruption. In our number 2 spot today we have the Boneyard. This is a photo that comes from what is called a boneyard. Basically, the photo was taken during a time when it was normal for overcrowded cemeteries to dig up skeletons after 5 years if the family didn't continue to pay for them to stay buried. Yeah, it's not a great rule, but it happened and it's a part of our weird dark history. This particular photo comes from near the Colon Cemetery in Cuba, and it shows what they did with these dug up bones. They put them in this boneyard that eventually grew to be 30 feet deep. That is so creepy. This photo shows how the area became a popular tourist destination, and this photo is said to have been taken after the Spanish-American War, and it shows 2 American soldiers playing with bones. Maybe not the best idea. I mean, a little respect for those who passed might be in order. It definitely is an eerie sight to behold. In our number 1 spot today we have the crypt. This is a photo that comes to us from the early 1900s, and it shows the area that is beneath the church of Santa Maria della Concezione di Cappuccini, which is located in Rome, Italy. This area is known as the Capuchin Crypt, and it is a little eerie to say the least. That is because the walls are lined with skeletal remains. It is said that on the walls there are the remains of 3,700 bodies believed to be the Catholic friars who were buried by their order. It is definitely terrifying to look at, and it seems a little nightmare-inducing, but the Catholic order insists it isn't meant to be so macabre. They explain that it's actually meant to be a silent reminder of the swift passage of life on Earth and our own mortality. Well, I can say it definitely does that. Starting off in our number 10 spot we have the Mad. This is a photo that was taken of someone known as the Mad. His real name was George Metesky, and he was the man who terrorized New York City for 16 years while he planted explosives in public places like an absolute psychopath. I guess he was apparently angry about a workplace injury he had suffered in the years prior to his terrible crimes, so of course the normal reasonable jump to make would be not that. While no one should have ever had to suffer because of these crimes, the good news is that while he planted 33 and set off 22 of them, miraculously only 15 people ended up injured in the end. This photo of him behind bars is extremely eerie thanks to his creepy smile and haunting eyes. I might be the only one who feels it, but it just seems like something's off. You know?
Coming in at number 9 we have Robin Williams, one of the greatest actors and comedic minds that has ever passed through Hollywood. There was movie after movie that this guy made that influenced people from my generation and so many generations after. And right before we get further into this point, guys, remember that you can like, comment, subscribe, and hit the little notification bell, and stick around to the end of the list because we're going to be answering some comments from our previous video, Top 10 Disney Mysteries. I mean, we can go down the list. This guy was in Aladdin, Jumanji, Mrs. Doubtfire. All of those movies were certified bangers, and this was the last picture of him before he passed. He looks so happy. He's chilling out with his monkey Crystal, and the two of them are just being the best of friends, but even having one of the coolest pets of all time wasn't enough to keep him happy. Unfortunately, shortly after this picture was taken, Robin Williams would visit the doctor and get a very sad diagnosis. It would seem that he had Parkinson's. It was devastating news that would lead to him taking his own life. Apparently, he was misdiagnosed and he actually had a specific type of dementia, which leads to paranoia.
In our 8th spot we have Amelia Earhart. The fate of Amelia Earhart is still unknown. Did she die in a plane crash? Did she get stranded on a deserted island? We honestly don't know. In 1937, Amelia set out with her navigator Fred Noonan to fly around the world. One of the last photos of Amelia was her packing her suitcase for travels, in which she would never return from. Much like these other celebrities, she looked so happy, just excited to go on this adventure. But little did she know it would end in tragedy. Amelia and Fred were last heard from on July 2nd, 1937. The government spent 15 years looking for them. In fact, searching for Earhart was the largest and most expensive search in American history. Sadly, hardly anything came of this. They thought that maybe the plane crashed somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, but who really knows?
Coming in at number 7, we have Gene Wilder. It's impressive how Gene Wilder was able to be both hilarious and terrifying in many of his performances. Like throughout most of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, he's kind of scary, but then when you check out Blazing Saddles, he's one of the funniest dudes around. This was the last picture taken of him, or at least the last one that was shared to the public. He lived well into his 80s, and in this picture you can see him with his daughter walking in Los Angeles. It was in 2013 when one of the most famous actors in the world would learn that he was battling Alzheimer's. This is obviously a very strenuous disease, and it can slowly wither a person away. It's a tough battle, and because of this, Gene wanted to stay out of the public eye. So after he was told by doctors that he was fighting Alzheimer's, he decided that he would stay out of the peering eye of fans and become a homebody. And I mean, it sounds like a solid move. You had an amazing career, so in your last few years it would be nice to relax. He passed away in 2016.
Coming in at number 6, we have Chris McCandless. Chris was a 24-year-old American adventurer. In 1992, Chris set out on another adventure, this time into the Alaskan wilderness. However, he never made it out alive. His death has been debated for years. Some say he died of starvation, others believe that he died of poisoning after eating toxic berries. The last photo ever captured of Chris was a picture he took of himself smiling and waving to the camera, holding a note. The note is believed to have said, "I have had a happy life and thank the Lord. Goodbye and may God bless all." Later, he was found dead by a group of hunters. The hunters were looking for a shelter for the night when they came across the bus where Chris was staying in. But when they entered, they discovered Chris laying in his sleeping bag at the back of the bus. His manes were already decomposing. Now, the last thing Chris ever wrote read, "Day 107. Beautiful blueberries." Then days 108 through 112 contained no words, they just had slashes. And on day 113, there was no entry at all. So maybe it was some toxic berry that killed him. But still, this photo is super eerie, especially because of the sign he was holding. It's like he knew he wasn't going to make it.
In our number 5 spot today, we have The Experiment. This is a photo that comes from some experiments that were being conducted from the French neurologist Duchenne de Boulogne. He was best known for his use of photographs during his experiments, as evidenced by, well, this video. He was also known for his research into the use of electrical stimulation of muscles, and of course these photos really help to capture exactly that. These photos have gone down in history, not even necessarily for what they show medically, but just because of how startling they are and the often grotesque facial expressions seen on the patient. The experiment being conducted in this shot was meant to determine how exactly the muscles in the face produce facial expressions, which he believed at the time were directly linked to the soul of a man. Of course, these strange faces the patient is making are due to the electrical stimulation, but the photos from his experiments truly make it look like the patients are going through some kind of torment or torture. As far as I know, the man in this photo was totally fine both before and after the experiment, despite what it may appear as, which is always what we want to hear.
In our 4th spot, we have James Dean. On September 30th, 1955, James Dean died in a car accident at only 24 years old. It's said that he was driving fast and suddenly had to swerve out of the way to avoid an oncoming car, but ended up hitting it almost head on. It's said that Dean died instantly, but his passenger survived with injuries. That day, Dean was photographed posing with the very car he later died in. In fact, that car is said to be cursed. He only owned it for 9 days before his death. Later, after he died, the car rolled off the back of a truck and crushed the legs of a mechanic. Then the car's parts were disassembled and installed into other cars around the world. All those car owners also got into deadly crashes. So Dean's last picture was literally with a cursed car that killed him.
Coming in at number 3, we have Aaliyah. Aaliyah was a rising star in the R&B community, and it seemed that she was going to be the next star in the music industry. Literally everyone who was into music was talking about her. Before she was 22 years old, she had already won 14 awards and been nominated for 73 awards through different music organizations. There's a good portion of us who don't even have our driver's license at 22, but her death would shock the world. Either one of those two pictures is thought to be the last of Aaliyah. They didn't have timestamps on every last picture back then, so we don't know exactly which one it is. But Aaliyah would board a plane that was headed to the Bahamas. It should have been a nice short trip, but the plane crashed. Out of nowhere, the next big thing in music was gone.
In our second spot, we have John Lennon. On December 8th, 1980, John Lennon was assassinated outside of his Manhattan apartment. Earlier that day, Lennon was photographed signing autographs for fans. The last photo of him was him signing an autograph for the man who would later murder him. It's so eerie. The photo literally foreshadows his fate. He was literally pictured with his killer. Later that night, the man in the photo, David Chapman, returned to Lennon's apartment and waited outside for him. When he came down, Chapman shot him 4 times in the back. That's just way too freaky for me.
And coming in at the number 1 spot, we have Marilyn Monroe. I mean, what didn't Marilyn Monroe do? It's thought that she changed how women could represent themselves in the public eye. She was one of the biggest beauty icons of all time. It's thought that she had an affair with the President of the United States. She was a bona fide legend, and she may never be forgotten. This was the last known picture taken of the superstar. She was hanging out with one of her buddies, Buddy Greco, who was a famous jazz musician of the time. Man, jazz has changed a lot. It used to be the coolest thing in town. There's no way you could be playing jazz now and it would get you into the arms of Scarlett Johansson. On the record, her death was deemed a suicide, but off the record, it seemed that the CIA might have taken her out. She knew too many secrets from being close to the president. They couldn't let those secrets leak out.
Starting off this countdown, we have Paul Walker. On November 30th, 2013, Paul Walker attended a charity event for Reach Out Worldwide. He was last captured driving off in a red Porsche Carrera GT. Little did he know that later that day, the car would crash into a concrete lamppost and 2 trees before bursting into flames, killing Walker and the driver instantly. It's so sad looking at this photo. Like, Paul seemed happy. He got into the car not knowing his fate. In fact, what makes this scarier is that he might have still been alive had it not been for one text. He woke up that morning completely forgetting about the charity event that he had to go to. That was until someone texted him to remind him. Had he not gone to the event and just stayed home, things would have been different.
In our number 9 spot today, we have the Pioneer's Defense. This photo is known as the Pioneer's Defense, and man does it ever look creepy. This photo comes from 1937 and it was taken by a Russian photographer named Viktor Bulla. This photo takes place in the Leningrad area, which is now known as St. Petersburg, which is the 2nd largest city in Russia. The people in this photo were part of a group that was the 1930s Russian equivalent of our Boy Scouts that was called the Young Pioneers. The masks on their faces leaves a very eerie feeling, and for a fair reason. These people were doing a military preparation drill, which is the reason for the gas masks. This photo was taken during a time when the country was under the dictatorship of Joseph Stalin, and the residents were constantly unsure of what was going to happen. The country was already seeing death, and people were already frightened just a few years before the start of World War II, and those in this photo felt the need to be prepared for the worst case scenario. In our number 8 spot today, we have the net test. This photo comes to us from 1958, and it is quite an interesting one. At a first glance, it looks fun, but then when you catch the expression on the person's face and look a little more into it, it really just leaves you with a ton of questions as to what exactly is going on here. It looks like a guy is going on some sort of a roller coaster ride, but what is actually happening is that a prisoner is being used to test safety nets before they were mass produced. Yeah, not the good time we thought it was. This comes from a time where capital punishment was much more widespread throughout the United States, and those waiting on death row couldn't just sit around waiting for their day to come. I think it's probably best that we made the switch to crash test dummies and that sort of thing, and this photo just remains as an eerie reminder of the less than great choices that were made in the past. In our number 7 spot today, we have a burst of joy. You might be looking at this photo wondering how this extremely joyous photo could hold any dark secrets. Well, this photo won a Pulitzer Prize, and for a good reason. This photo was captured by Slava Vetter on March 17, 1973 at the Travis Air Force Base in California. This photo shows United States Air Force Lieutenant Robert L. Sturm and his family. This was taken as he was being reunited with his family after 5 years of being held as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. On October 27, 1967, he was leading a flight of F-105s when he was shot down over Hanoi and held captive until March March 14th, 1973. I can't imagine what this must have been like for his family, because there was a huge chance that he could have not come home at all. The looks on their faces of course clearly show that this photo is capturing an exceptionally joyful moment. It's just the story behind this moment that leaves us all with that unsettling feeling. In our number 6 spot today, we have Ghost Boy. This photo is said to have been taken inside of the infamous Amityville horror house in 1976. It is said that this creepy vintage photo is still one of the most chilling paranormal photos of all time. Yep, that's right, this photo is said to be of a ghost. After the DeFeo killing, the next owner of the house, George Lutz, swore that the house was haunted, and he called in none other than Ed and Lorraine Warren, the most famous paranormal investigators ever. On one night of the investigations, they set up an automatic camera on the second floor of the house, and this photo is said to have been caught then. Some believe that the ghostly face staring back is that of a young John Defoe who lost his life in this house. I'm not 100% sure either way, but what I am sure of is that if this is actually a photo of a ghost and not a real person, that is ridiculously creepy.
Coming in at number 5, we have Nikola Tesla, one of the greatest minds to ever grace the earth. This dude was straight up one of the smartest people who has ever lived. If it wasn't for this guy, we wouldn't have the radio, we wouldn't have access to electricity the way that we do today. And even though he has nothing to do with the company Tesla that makes electric cars, there would be a solid chance that those electric cars wouldn't be running right now if it wasn't for the inventions that this man made. This was the last known picture of the inventor. He looks like he was ill, but he was actually mostly thin because he had changed his diet to eating very light. He wouldn't eat meat and he mostly lived off bread, honey, and vegetable juices. Probably the saddest part about the end of Tesla's life is that he basically had no money, although he did find pleasure in pigeons. For some reason, the inventor had an obsession with pigeons. He would go to the park and feed them, and even said that they gave him some of the ideas for his inventions. That's the secret. We've got to start hanging out with more pigeons.
In our number 4 spot today, we have the Apollo 1 prayer. This photo was originally taken and meant to be a sort of lighthearted prank or joke, but it would later turn out to be a chilling image. This photo shows the Apollo 1 crew jokingly praying over a miniature model of their command module. The 3 men in the photo are Roger Chaffee, Virgil Grissom, and Ed White, and sadly during a test launch on January 27, 1967, they all burned to death. To make this story even worse, prior to the test, the 3 of them had voiced concerns about the amount of flammable material that was on the craft. The fire was determined to have been caused by an electrical fault, and it spread extremely quickly due to combustible nylon material coupled with the high-pressure pure oxygen atmosphere in the cabin. They also were unable to be rescued or escape because the plug door hatch couldn't be opened against the internal pressure of the cabin. Before this test, it was believed that since there was no fuel on the rocket, it would be relatively safe, which is exactly why there wasn't more preparedness in case of emergency. Looking back now, this photo is certainly more mysterious than anyone at the time could have ever imagined. In our number 3 spot today, we have the HILO tsunami. This photo comes to us from April 1st, 1946. This is the day when an 8.6 magnitude earthquake hit just off of the coast of the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. As we all know, earthquakes can often have after effects, and this one sent shockwaves throughout the Pacific. This led to the formation of an ocean-wide tsunami that had waves reaching up to 13 stories high. This disaster went on to strike Hilo, Hawaii, in what became one of the worst disasters in Hawaiian history. This photo somehow survived the disaster, and it captures the terrifying view someone must have had in their last moments. This photo is especially chilling to view just days after the Tonga volcano eruption occurred. The Earth and these naturally occurring disasters are absolutely terrifying and powerful and unpredictable. In our number 2 spot today, we have the shadows. As most of us know, on August 6th, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. This was devastating to the city, and of course we can understand the implications of this. This photo shows what is called a nuclear shadow, and this is just one that could be seen throughout the city. When the bomb detonated 1,900 feet above the center of the city, the explosion caused temperatures of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit to spread through everything within 1,600 feet of it. This of course destroyed nearly everything and everyone within a mile of it. The light and heat from the bomb was so powerful that it bleached the exposed surfaces of the city, except as seen here, where an unsuspecting person was shielding the surface with their own body. It is truly such an eerie reminder of the impact that this really had. In our number 1 spot today, we have the crash. This is one of those photos that was just taken in the right place at the right time, but it shows a very scary situation. A man named Jim Meads is said to have taken this photo in 1962. Story goes that a man named Bob Sowray had mentioned to Jim that he was going to fly this plane called the Lightning the following day. Jim took his kids out for a walk that next day and took his camera with him, intending to get a shot of the aircraft as Bob flew it. He wanted to get a photo of his children with the airfield in the background just as the plane was coming into land. They found the spot, they got all set up, just waiting for the plane to return. Turns out that day Bob didn't fly the plane, and instead the pilot was actually a man named George Aird, who was another test pilot. So George is up in the plane and he realizes that there's trouble. Since I don't know plane language, I'm gonna use this quote from fearoflanding.com, which wrote, quote, "Whilst carrying out a demonstration flight, there was a fire in the aircraft's reheat zone. Unburned fuel in the rear fuselage had been ignited by a small crack in the jet pipe and had weakened the tailplane actuator anchorage. This weakened the tailplane control system, which failed with the aircraft at 100 feet on final approach. This led to the plane pitching up aggressively as George came into land. George lost control and he ejected in order to save himself. Luckily, since the nose had pitched up, he had just enough time. The tractor driver in this photo was then 15-year-old Mike Sutterby, who had spent that summer working on this airfield. He wasn't actually posing, he was telling Jim to move since he wasn't supposed to be there, before turning to look at what was happening behind him. This is all what led to this photo being snapped and this story surviving all of these years. In the end, George was okay, aside from some minor injuries, and while Jim didn't get the photo he set out for that day, he still got quite an interesting one. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the reenactment. This photo is extremely unsettling and for a very good reason. If, when you look at this photo, your instincts tell you that the guy in them is creepy, ding ding ding, you're right. This is a photo that features the German serial killer Joachim Kroll. He is known for taking the lives of 14 people, all varying in age, and he is known for also consuming parts of their flesh. This monster was caught in 1976, and he was discovered when police found out that he had clogged the plumbing in his apartment with remains of one of his victims. How gruesome is that? This photo was taken shortly after he was caught and arrested, and what you're seeing is Kroll reenacting one of his crimes for the police. I get goosebumps just thinking about that. I couldn't imagine being there, or being the police officer he's on top of. Talk about terrifying. I'm just glad that they caught him and got him off of the street. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Great Manta. In 1933, a New York silk manufacturer named A.L. Kahn was on a nice little vacation in Florida when he honestly accidentally caught something remarkable. His anchor line, by mistake, caught onto a giant manta ray. After a struggle and several hours, Kahn was able to get this actually enormous fish ashore. This monster was somewhere between 5,000 to 6,000 pounds and was 20 feet and 5 inches in width. For reference, there are other giant manta rays, but they usually grow to be around 13 to 14 feet wide, not 20 and a half. This photo is showing a taxidermy version of the fish which Kahn used to bring around to exhibitions to show off his accidental catch. In an article from the December 10th, 1933 issue of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch's Sunday magazine, Kahn is quoted as saying, quote, "Fishing is a lot of fun when you catch the fish. And sometimes it's fun even when you don't, but when the fish catches you." In our number 8 spot today, we have the swimsuits. This is a photo that comes to us from the 1920s, and it shows just one of the many extremely important jobs that the quote beach patrol of the day had. Yes, they went around measuring the length between a woman's knee and the bottom of her swimsuit because God forbid she showed too much leg at the beach. In the 1920s, bathing suits began to become something that went through changes and fads, and of course this evolution to more form-fitting, less material swimwear caused a lot of controversy in the day. There were then strict dress codes implemented at places like resorts and country clubs, and even directors of public beaches had them, thus the beach patrol. There were fines for violations and sometimes even imprisonment. In the Washington Post in 1907, there was a photo of 2 women in bathing suits being escorted by an officer with a caption, quote, "These apologies for skirts endanger the morals of the children. The police must interfere and stop the outrageous proceedings." In most cases, these sorts of rules really only affected the women of the time, and sometimes women were even required to wear stockings under their bathing suits. I'm just saying, with my attitude, I would have not done well in the 1920s. There was even one beach who had a tailor go around and stitch up swimsuits that they felt weren't up to the dress code. In our number 7 spot today, we have the advertisement. This is a photo that comes to us from a time of World War II, and it shows a terrifying ad. The sign reads, "These men didn't take their ADVERTISEMENT," and at first I had absolutely no idea what that was. Turns out ADVERTISEMENT is the first synthetic form of quinine, which was used by the US military to fight malaria in the South Pacific during the war. It is estimated that as many as 2/3 of the troop fell ill with malaria. This sign is said to have been posted outside of a military hospital in New Guinea and was meant to serve as a warning for those who didn't take the medicine, warning that the skulls on top would be the fate that awaited them. Perhaps a little dark, but creative and likely effective nonetheless. At the very least, the ad is quite clear. In our number 5 spot today, we have a UFO report. This is less of a photo and is actually more like a PDF, but I still felt like it applied to today's list. This is a previously classified document from 1963. Although the document still has a ton of information that has been blacked out, the document is the description and report of an unidentified flying object, or a UFO encounter. This is said to have taken place over the desert of Nevada, and the report was written in detail in order to have a written record of the event. This document is said to have been the authentic report from the FBI, which is exactly why some of the details have still been omitted. This might seem like less of a big deal now, as in this day and age we have declassified video footage of similar kinds of encounters, but for 1963 this was huge. As discussions of alien or extraterrestrial life is a big part of our modern day society, this document shows that these things have been on our minds for many, many years now. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Hindenburg. This is a photo that was taken during what is now known as the Hindenburg disaster. It is commonly known that blimps, or these kinds of floating airships, use helium in them to float through the air, and it's important to note that this helium isn't the choice because it's the only option, but rather it's one of the safest options because it isn't extremely volatile. Because of a US ban on the exportation of helium at the time, i.e. the Helium Control Act of 1925, although the Hindenburg was designed to use helium, because of a lack of it available, on the day of the Hindenburg disaster, the much more flammable hydrogen was used instead. This led to a complete disaster. When the Hindenburg floated off on May 6, 1937, it disastrously caught fire during its flight with 97 people on board. Sadly, due to the fire, there were 35 casualties on board the flight that day. It is an absolutely horrendous situation, but it does teach us all a very valuable lesson. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Falls. This is a photo of Annie Edison Taylor when she was 63 years old in 1901. The barrel she is posing beside is the one that she sealed herself up inside of to then become the first person to survive a trip over Niagara Falls. Why did she do this? Well, for money, of course. Annie was widowed and spent a lot of time bouncing between different jobs, but after having been burned out of her home and losing money that she had invested with a clergyman, she ended up sadly falling on some hard times, and this is what led her to the Falls. The barrel she used was custom made, and it was constructed of oak and iron and padded with a mattress. It wasn't exactly easy to get this whole plan set up, and it ended up being delayed several times, mostly because people were afraid to be a part of this mission that was likely sending Annie to her death, and I truly don't blame them at all. On October 24th, 1901, her 63rd birthday, Annie climbed in the barrel with her heart-shaped pillow and was set adrift. The river currents carried the barrel over the Canadian Horseshoe Falls, and rescuers reached her barrel shortly after. She was alive and escaped with little to no injuries aside from a gash on her head. While her survival is great news, it's important to include what Annie had to say about the entire situation after, which was, quote, "If it was with my dying breath, I would caution anyone against attempting the feat. I would sooner walk up to the mouth of a cannon knowing it was going to blow me to pieces than make another trip over the falls." So don't try this at home, is what she's saying. In our number 2 spot today, we have War is Hell. This is a photo of a soldier that was taken during the Vietnam War. The soldier has a hand-scribed note on their helmet that reads, quote, "War is hell," and I truly cannot even imagine. In 1954, the US entered the war to support South Vietnam against the regime in North Vietnam, as well as their allies in the South. This war lasted for 2 decades and it claimed more than 3 million lives, mostly those of Vietnamese civilians. There are many many powerful, disturbing, and unsettling photos from this war, many of which I would consider too graphic to put here on YouTube. There's something about the brightness of the eyes of the soldier that sits in contrast with the rest of this dark photo that really make it stand out. For a while, the identity of this soldier was left a mystery, but after some years, Fran Chafin Morrison revealed that the soldier was her late husband, Larry Wayne Chaffin. Larry served for a year in the 173rd Brigade, beginning in May 1965, and when this photo was taken, he was just 19 years old. He did end up being discharged from the army and was able to return home to his wife. He sadly ended up passing away at the young age of 39, thought to be because of complications due to the exposure to Agent Orange, but his legacy has lived on. There's an incredible photo of his grandson who looks strikingly similar to his grandfather, holding this exact portrait. In our number 1 spot today, we have the cross. This photo comes to us from 1960, and it shows Martin Luther King Jr., along with his infant son at the time, removing a cross that had been burnt on his front lawn. This photo is important and powerful for quite a few reasons. Firstly, it's just a glimpse into what Mr. King would have dealt with every single day for many years. It is clear by his almost nonchalant look that this isn't something new or surprising. It's also important to note, however, that this look isn't one of acceptance or content, or of someone who is unbothered, but instead it's the look of someone who continually chooses to rise above, someone who chooses to remain calm and cool in the face of adversity. The leader of a movement. As a Reddit user, 1945 Best Year put so well, quote, "Here he's a father, a man with a family whose lives are being threatened. He isn't hysterical or obviously afraid, and his towering figure literally rooting out the undesirable foe has been done in any number of war propaganda posters, but he's still sympathetic. He deserves the security of knowing that home will be safe for his children like anybody else." Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have a pile of bones. During the 19th century, bison were hunted so much that they were actually quite close to being extinct, and by the mid-1880s there were only a few hundred left. Hides were prepared and then shipped off so that they could be made into leather, but usually the bones, or really anything other than the hide, was just left to decay, as it wasn't useful to the hunters. The hunting of bison was so widespread and overwhelming that even the US Army sanctioned and endorsed the slaughter of herds of bison. The federal government was promoting it for a variety of reasons, including to lessen a food and material source for the indigenous peoples. The US government was even paying a bounty for each bison skull, and military commanders were ordering troops to kill bison, not for them to eat, but just so that the indigenous couldn't. That story, coupled with the sheer mass amounts of skulls seen in this photo, is exactly what makes it so exceptionally unsettling. These bones would likely be on their way to become fertilizer.
In our 9th spot, we have Victor Barrio. But before we go any further, if you guys are liking this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up, and of course, subscribe to our channel. Come on guys, it really helps us out, so hit that button, subscribe, ring that little bell. Victor Barrio was a 29-year-old Spanish bullfighter. Sadly, on July 9th, 2016, his bullfighting days came to an end when a 529-kilogram bull's horn pierced through his chest. This moment was captured in front of a live audience and also was broadcasted on live TV. Some people managed to get photos as this happened, and it's horrifying. You can see the look of pain on his face as the bull's horn just plunges through him. Like, I feel so bad for him and for all the people that had to witness it. It's so scary. In our 8th spot, we have the Panama hikers. Chris Kremers and Lizanne Froon were two young Dutch females that saved up to take a trip to Panama. Except while on a hike in the Panamanian jungle, the two disappeared. It wasn't until months later that their bodies were found, but it's still unclear how the two died. The last photos taken of them were in April of 2014, the day that they went on the hike. They are selfies of the girls looking very excited to be on the trip. These photos were found on their camera, which was found in a backpack along the banks of a river. The camera also contained other pictures, like of the jungle in the dead of night. Maybe they were using the camera's flash as a source of light. Another photo showed the back of Chris's head and it was bleeding. Again, it's so scary looking at these photos. Like, these poor young girls had no clue what was about to happen to them, and they were so excited for their trip. Coming in at number 7, we have the drowning. On October 22nd, 2003, Tina Watson and her husband, David Gabriel, went out scuba diving on their honeymoon. They just got married 11 days earlier, and scuba diving was part of their honeymoon itinerary. Now, in this photo, if you look right at the back, you can see a diver laying on the sea floor. That's Tina Watson. A few minutes before this photo was taken, it's believed that her husband turned off her air supply and held her underwater until she drowned. Then he swam up to the surface to alert other divers that she was in trouble. The photo was captured accidentally, and you can see the divers going to help Tina. Some say he held her underwater until she drowned. Others say he saw her struggling as a new scuba diver and just kinda left her there to die on her own. Either way, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter, and that was the last photo ever taken of her. In our 6th spot, we have the DYATLOV Pass incident. In February of 1959, a group of 9 experienced hikers set out to traverse the snowy mountains of Siberia. However, they all ended up mysteriously dying one by one. This photo was one of the last photos taken of them. Now, this case has been debated about for years, and there's tons of theories as to what happened to them. Some say they were hit by an avalanche at night and died from exposure. Others say a Yeti got them. In fact, there was a picture of a creature that looks like a Yeti found on one of the explorers' cameras. But it's a very odd case, like their tent was found ripped open from the inside, 2 bodies were found and they were only wearing underwear in the freezing cold. Another explorer's body was missing her tongue, eyes, and lips, and 2 of the other bodies had major chest fractures. To cause someone that much damage, it would be like equivalent to a car crash. And another hiker had a really high level of radiation on their clothes. It's just crazy, and to this day we don't know what truly happened. We all have these theories, but the only ones that really know are the hikers in the photo.
In our number 6 spot today, we have the Ferris wheel of hate. This is a photo that, honestly, I don't even know what to say about it. It's gross, it's weird, it's upsetting, and it's honestly just so stupid. For a long time, this photo went under the radar as the photographer who took it didn't share it with the paper, but when it resurfaced 65 years later, it spread like wildfire, and for a lot different reasons than it would have back then, thankfully, but it also reveals some of those blind spots in history that we have. This photo comes from April of 1926, and it shows some members of the KKK just enjoying a day at an amusement park with many of them on a Ferris wheel. I wish this was one of those times where something went horribly wrong and the whole thing came crashing down, but unfortunately that likely isn't what happened on this day, and now we just have this relic that shows us the insane power and influence that this hate group had during this time. While this photo is very dark, it's an important part of history to remember. Also, before we move on, let's just take a second to talk about how stupid they all look. Like, we gotta wear our little matching outfits to the Ferris wheel. In our number 5 spot today, we have early plastic surgery. This photo, well, rather these 2 photos side by side, show a man named Walter Yeo, and he was the first person to receive the, at the time advanced, plastic surgery procedure called the skin flap. Sounds disgusting. He received this procedure in 1917, and at the time, since it was so advanced, it was only used for very serious things, like for someone who was wounded in battle, which is exactly what had happened to Walter. He was a soldier in the Battle of Jutland during the First World War. Walter was actually a sailor, and he was manning the guns aboard the HMS Warspite, and while doing this, he sustained facial injuries that included the loss of his upper and lower eyelids. In the end, he needed a couple more operations, but he was even able to return to service for a little while before being medically discharged. After this, he lived his life until he reached the age of 70 years old.
In our 4th spot, we have the Facebook murder. A couple of hours after this picture was taken, Cheyenne Anton left, used the black belt she is seen wearing in that photo to strangle Brittany Gargle. The 2 were best friends, but apparently got into a heated argument and Cheyenne hit and strangled Brittany. Imagine taking a selfie with someone you thought you could trust just for them to go and kill you a couple hours later. It is so sick. Now, Cheyenne actually got away with this murder for 2 years until police finally found this photo on her Facebook and noticed that the belt that she was wearing was the same one found at the crime scene. She then pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Moving on to number 3, we have parkour gone wrong. Pavel Kashin was known for his dangerous stunts and abilities. In 2013, he challenged himself to do a backflip on the edge of a 16-floor building. He successfully completed the backflip, but as he landed, he lost his footing and fell over the edge. He died instantly. This photo was captured by his friend while he was performing the stunt. You can see he's in mid-air doing his trick. Sadly, that was the last stunt he ever performed. And at number 2, we have the Stalker. On February of 2017, best friends Abby Williams and Libby German headed out for a hike in Indiana. This photo is of Abby Williams, taken right before they were both murdered. What's very disturbing is that in the background of these photos you can literally see their killer lurking there. Apparently the man was stalking them for quite some time, and in the girls' photo roll they actually got some pictures of him, probably because they felt like he was following them. So in the last photo ever taken of Abby, you can literally see her killer behind her. It makes me so sick. Worst of all, he's never been caught. There's currently a reward for anyone that can identify the man though, so hopefully they can get some justice soon. And in our number one spot we have the gruesome scene. This photo is going to send shivers down your spine. But before I show you, let me give you a quick backstory. So this photo was taken of Travis Alexander while he was taking a shower. It was taken by his girlfriend and murderer Jody shortly before she stabbed him 27 to 29 times. She also slit his throat nearly ear to ear and shot him in the head. It was a very gruesome and sinister murder. In this photo you can see how uncomfortable Travis looks. It's almost as if he knew she was up to something. He looks absolutely terrified. Now the camera that captured this photo was actually tossed into his washing machine as an attempt to destroy it, but it didn't work and some of the photos were still salvageable, like this one and one that she took of Travis's dead bloody body. I saw it, you don't want to see it.